Hello and welcome to the weekly Dartcast. I'm Ben the Groper Roper and you're listening to my darting teammate Alex the Spectacle Wonder 131 Moss. 180!
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the weekly Dartscast, sponsored by Dartwolf. I'm Alex Moss, and joining me, my co-host, back after a few weeks away on what seemed to be a never-ending holiday. It is, of course, darts statistician Burton DeWitt. Burton, I trust you're home now. How was the trip, and are you pleased to be back talking darts again?
It was only a 5-week holiday. Yeah, no, it was a great trip. Nearly halfway around the world. I had a fantastic time, but I was ready and happy to get home. Now I've been back a week, settled in, and enjoyed the World Grand Prix last week, and I think we're ready to talk about that. How about you, though? How are you doing?
Glad to it. Yeah, all good this end. I actually played in a darts tournament at the weekend. As some of our listeners on Twitter might have seen, I made the last 32 in a field of 28 players. So I'll take that. Maybe next time I'll get a buy and improve that to a last 16. But yeah, we've got a fun show lined up for you guys this week. We've got the World Grand Prix, as you mentioned, to review, the last Euro Tour of the year coming up this weekend, and some other bits and pieces to delve into at the end. We've also got two guests joining us fresh from that run to the final in Leicester. Nathan Aspinall.calls by, and ahead of the final weekend of the Challenge Tour this weekend, Danny van Trijp.calls in as well, one of the players in the provisional spots for those tour cards and World Championship spots heading into that final weekend. But let's get to Leicester last week, where on Sunday Michael van Gerwen won his 6th World Grand Prix title, holding off a brave fight back in the final from Nathan Aspinall to win it 5-3. Brings us on to our first of two questions of the week that we've got for you guys this week. Lots of debate on this last week on social media, and it seemed like at the venue as well, on who is the best player in the world right now. Our poll, the options are Michael van Gerwen, Gerwin Price, Peter Wright, or other. Who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Michael van Gerwen, and the thing that we've harped on about for a couple of years now that had been missing from his game is there now. The consistency and that ability to play near his best across an entire week, across an entire tournament. He didn't at the World Match Play, but he came pretty close. He was playing at a good standard most of the time, but he played at a very high standard the entire week in Leicester. That's what he was doing almost every tournament for 4 or 5 years as he became one of the two greatest players of all time. For him to be able to have a tournament where he did that and to throw, okay, the average is well in the 90s, but that's because it was double in. The rule of thumb is add 10 points to that average, and Darts Oracle can correct us and say exactly what you should be adding to the average, but that's the rule of thumb. Well, that means he was playing at that 100 average across the week. And okay, especially in the early rounds, he was so good at getting in that it really wasn't like he was losing that much on his average by having to double from the start. But it does have some effect. He played at that for a week, and he was really never in serious trouble. Yes, he went to a last set decider against Stephen Bunting, but he was the better player. And yes, he let Nathan Aspinall back into the match from 4-0 up, but he was the better player, and he had that cushion that even though he kind of went off the boil and a few points came off his average across those 3 sets, he still had that buffer that he could then get it together when he needed to and win a set 3-1 to finish off the match. Michael van Gerwen may have been a couple points below his very best, but Michael van Gerwen at his very best was more than a couple points better than anyone else. And when you add in that consistency that he used to have and that he had this week, it made him all the more unplayable. He's still beatable, and there still are going to be doubts because he hasn't done this every single tournament. He hasn't done this every single week like he used to. And that means he's not the same player or at that same level that he was before. But he is right now the best player in the world. And this past week, he showed it. And in the World Match Play, he pretty much showed it. And at the key moments across the Premier League campaign, he showed it. He's still vulnerable. He's still much more vulnerable than he was 5 years ago. But that doesn't mean he's not the best player. I don't even think right now it's that close. He's a good level ahead of anyone else. Not, again, the 4 or 5 levels. He was ahead of Gary Anderson 5 years ago, and 10 levels he was ahead of everyone else. But he's still a level ahead of everyone else, and that makes him the best player in the world.
I think I'm with you on this one. And at the time of recording, we've had more than 500 votes on our poll on Twitter for this. Is running for the rest of the week. So do go and vote if you haven't already, but 81% of our listeners going with you and with me, with Michael van Gerwen, 10% going with Gerwin Price, 4% going with Peter Wright, 5% going with other. I'm not sure who they go with on the other, but you look at everything that we've seen so far this year, the year to date, the ranking money, that title that Michael van Gerwen picked up at the weekend, he's now more than £200,000 clear of second place, which is Danny Noppert at the moment. And you mentioned about our friends at Darts Oracle. You look at the stats from the start of this season to now, Michael van Gerwen is top of the averages, almost, well, over half a point clear of Damon Heta in second place, and the two other players that we mentioned almost a full point clear of Peter Wright, more than a point clear of Gerwin Price, and the titles as well. The one on Sunday, that's 9 titles now for this season, closing in on double figures. And we had the last, probably the best part of 3 years, it's felt like one of the most open eras in the PDC, and we'll come on to talk about the 30 years of the PDC that they've put out on social media today when we're talking. But you look back to a lot of those 30 years, they've been dominated by either Phil Taylor or Michael van Gerwen. But Michael van Gerwen, he's had 2 long runs without lifting big silverware. Okay, the first run, March to November 2020, 4 of those months no one was playing because everyone was locked down. But you look at, from that Players' Championship Finals title at the end of 2020, he won a World Series event in 2021. But in terms of those TV ranking events, or an event like the Premier League or the Masters, it was the best part of 18 months between a big title. But now he's starting to pick off these titles pretty regularly, isn't he? The Premier League, the World Match Play, now the World Grand Prix is starting to feel like more of a dominant era again for Michael van Gerwen. And yeah, there's still a lot for him to do to get back to those levels of when he was at his peak, or maybe that might have been his first peak, but that is now back-to-back TV ranking titles for him, and that's the first time that he's done that since late 2017. And for me, that is quite significant. And when you look at those 3 players at the top of the rankings, Peter Wright now back to number 1, Price number 2, Michael van Gerwen number 3. I think when you put all of them together, when they're playing at their A game, they are all capable of beating each other. I don't think anyone there's a huge gap in the standard between all 3 of them on their day. But based on what we've seen this year, you have to say that Michael van Gerwen right now, he is that top player. And when he's winning these big titles again, okay, he's had some sticky moments in all 3 of those, and particularly in the finals as well. The match play final, come from behind to beat Gerwin Price. The Premier League, Joe Cullen had that match start, and the final on Sunday, Nathan Aspinall 4-0 down, 2 darts to force it to a deciding set. So he's come through 3 of the biggest finals, and he's won them all. And he often says there's more in the tank. There's a lot to be said, though, for just simply winning these titles. And for someone who made it a habit, then seemingly lost the know-how to do it for a little while, to get it back and still not be at his peak, it says a lot for me. And yeah, I think Michael van Gerwen right now, he is the best player in the world. And if he carries on, you would be brave to back against him being the best in the world by rankings come early January next year.
But we would be remiss not to mention the week that the runner-up had for Nathan Aspinall getting to his second major final, coming within 2 sets of lifting the title, beating the world number 1 in what was a very, very good performance in that semifinal. Gerwin Price missed a lot of doubles, and just playing at a high standard through most of the week got Nathan Aspinall to the final. But the question is, will it get him into the Premier League, or will he be in the Premier League next year?
Yeah, we are spoiling you this week with our questions of the week. We've got 2 for you this week, and this one seems to be a bit closer in the vote among our listeners. 60% going with yes, Nathan Aspinall will be in the Premier League next year. 40% going with no, and a few of our listeners getting in touch. Darts Singer 125 saying, with how tough it is to get in with 8 players, I don't see it unless he wins a big one before that. Jeremy 96 saying only if he wins the Masters. And you heard Matt Porter on the show last week talked about the Premier League, and it is the players' form which drives the decision on how they're picked. And of course the rankings as well. I think it is still the top 4 that gets automatically invited to the Premier League. So if Nathan Aspinall goes and wins the World Championship, or makes the final, or adds a major to his tally, gets in that top 4, he becomes an automatic pick. But of course, if he was to win the World Championship, he would be in regardless of rankings. But I think as of right now, this run last week, it's put his name firmly back in the conversation. And you're going to hear from Nathan in a few moments. He says there's going to be a statement come out from him in the coming days, not talking about the Premier League, but just putting to bed the injury that he's had for the last 12 months, and saying that now he is back to full fitness and a fully fit Nathan Aspinall. He is a threat in any major event. He's a player that's already proved himself in the Premier League final on debut, got to the semi-finals last year, missed out this year, but we've still got 4 major events to come this year. And if we were picking the Premier League right now, I think Nathan Aspinall would probably make my 8. It is close, and I think these 4 TV events to go, it is still open for a few of those spots. So if anyone goes and wins one of those titles, they are going to be in the mix as well. And if Nathan goes and loses first round in all 4 of these TV events that we've got left, then it might be difficult to see him get in. But he said himself in our chat, out of all the players that weren't in the Premier League this year, he's been one of the most open that he wants to get back in. He wants to experience it with the full crowds week in, week out, which he wasn't able to do in his previous 2 appearances. He had a little taste of it at the start of 2020 and at the end of 2021 when we had that small crowd in Milton Keynes. But to get that week in, week out big crowd experience is something that he's really hoping to get. And final of a major like the World Grand Prix, claiming some scalps like he did on the way, Michael Smith, Gerwen Price, Danny up at 3 top 10 players he's beaten on the way to get to that final, and pushing Michael van Gerwen in that final. It's a big step in the right direction, and I think there's still more work to be done. But right now, if we were picking the Premier League on the 11th of October, I think Nathan Aspinall would make it.
Yeah, I'm similarly on the fence about him right now for like the reasons you said. I think if the field was picked today, he's right there or thereabouts as the 8th or 9th player. But as you said, the field is not picked today. And there still are 4 more major championships to come, plus the Masters, assuming that the PDC continues with the Masters being the last spot, or at least one spot left open for the Masters. There's the European Championships, there's the Grand Slam, there's the Players Championship, and there's the World Championship, all still to play for this year. And that's 4 potential winners, and all 4 ranking events. So that's 4 potential winners that could leapfrog him or blow even further past him in the order of merit right now. As things currently stand, the top 4 in the world after the World Championships are set to be Peter Wright, Michael van Gerwen, Gerwen Price, and Michael Smith. And I think all 4 of those are in. Certainly the top 3 are in, even if somehow one or multiple of them fall out of the top 4. I think Michael Smith probably stays in unless he has a series of early exits over the next 4 majors and drops out of the top 4, which could happen. But assuming that doesn't happen, I think all 4 of those are in. That leaves 4 more spots and a lot of players in that contention. Luke Humphries, Danny Noppert has won a major. Johnny Clayton was the top player in the Premier League stage this year. Nathan Aspinall's made a final. Joe Cohen made the final and had a dart to win the Premier League. Dirk van Dijvenbode has made a final. And there are other players who have the game to sneak in. I think right now Nathan Aspinall is that 8th or 9th player in the Premier League. That means it's his spot if he wants it and if he's able to go and get it over the next 3 months. But is he in the Premier League next year? I don't know. He's playing well enough, and he's playing strong darts right now, and it makes you think that he has more runs like the one he had in Leicester to come over the next few months. If those go through, he'll only increase his CV and only increase the chances that he gets selected. But it's not a done deal. I think I agree with you that right now he is either the last person in or the first person out, and I think he's playing well enough that he can improve on that. But it's definitely not a done deal, and we'll see who lifts the silverware over the next few months. And that'll determine whether Nathan Aspinall stays in or gets in or is left out for the 2nd year running.
Well, we've talked about the winner. We've talked about the runner-up. We'll continue our look back at the World Grand Prix last week in a moment. But let's hear from the runner-up. Here's our chat with a former major champion, Nathan Aspinall. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Sunday's World Grand Prix runner-up, Nathan Aspinall. Thanks for the time, Nathan. How you doing?
Yeah, very well, mate. Yourself? You good?
All good, thanks. And we are a little under 48 hours since Sunday's final, where you ran Michael van Gerwen close, coming back from 4-0 down to 4-3 before losing out 5-3. How do you reflect now on last week in Leicester?
Yeah, all I can do is take positives away from the weekend. The week, sorry. I played some high-profile players all week. Every game I've had to grind the results out and to obviously walk away with the trophy. Granted, it wasn't the one I wanted, but to make the final of any TV major is special. It's always nice to make the final. It's the first time I played Michael in a TV final as well, so that kind of added to the occasion. I'll just like I say, massive positives on the week, and that's all I can really say, to be fair.
Well, we'll come back to the Grand Prix a little later, but we'll rewind to when we last had you on the show, just after you made the semi-finals on your first event back on the Euro Tour. you were very open about the struggles that you were having with your injury, and I remember you saying there was a concern about your future in darts. You may have to have an operation. So what's changed since then to get you back to where you are now, getting into major finals?
Yeah, so the operation was true. I had to have an operation. That's what he was advising me to do, and take the time away from the sport for, it was a minimum of 6 months, and that was basically to go into the wrist and basically sew my tendons back together, which sounds pretty brutal. So that was kind of one part of the procedure, and then also in my wrist I have no cartilage left. So when I throw, like my two bones effectively near my index finger rub together. So there was also talk about shaving the bone in my wrist. So as you can tell, it's two quite big procedures for someone of my, someone who plays darts basically for a living. So I didn't want to go down that route. The only other option was obviously resting and kind of a bit of rehab, which is the option I went down. Obviously, it's affected me match practice because I couldn't play for probably 2 or 3 months. Practice wise, it's been really tough because after I'd say half an hour, the pain was unbearable. But I made the decision. I didn't want to do the operation. I didn't want to take the risk of, 1, would I ever come back to the standard I played at? 2, could I ever play again? Operations do go wrong, and that was obviously a big concern of mine. So I made the decision to go against it, and I've just kind of dealt with it myself, really. I've cut the practice down. I was picking and choosing tournaments, pulling out of tournaments if I didn't feel up to it, and just trying to give myself the best opportunity to get a few wins in the tournaments I played, and it seems to have worked.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, since that semi-final on the Euro Tour, you've made some big strides in this comeback, if you like. I mean, a final on the floor, then you won a title soon after that. What did that mean to you to be back in the winner's circle in the PDC again?
Yeah, I think you saw the emotion. I say it's only a Pro Tour because to win a Pro Tour is a massive thing, but obviously I've won bigger tournaments than that, and I think I show more emotion winning the floor tournament than I probably did when I won the UK Open. So it's been a battle. It's been tough. I've been an absolute nightmare to live with for the last 4 or 5 months because I've had to deal with the mental state as well. I love this game. I have an amazing life. And as I keep saying in interviews, when you get so close to being taken away, you appreciate what you've got. And I think it was a combination of everything I've been through for the last 6 months to actually see, wow, I can actually still win these tournaments. That it was kind of a massive weight off my shoulders. I was like, will I ever get back to playing my best? Or will I ever get back to winning? And when I won that tournament, it was like I say, a massive weight off my shoulders, and it gave me the belief and the hunger to actually want to get back to the top again.
And we saw that one of the first major events we saw you back in was the World Match Play, where you made the quarterfinals, and you said after your first round win over Luke Humphreys, not many were giving you a chance in that one. Are you someone who'll read or listen to what the pundits are predicting, or did you just get that impression people were writing you off?
No, it's the one thing I've got to stop doing. I'm big into my social media. I see everything. See it, what everyone says, and to be fair, I do use it as motivation sometimes. Obviously that was why I had that reaction on the game against Luke Humphreys, because I seen everyone, people weren't even thinking I was going to win a couple of legs, let alone win the match. So yeah, I do use it as motivation sometimes, but then likewise sometimes it works against you when you see negative stuff. But that was my first tournament back on the telly, and I knew I was playing well. I think I'd won another Pro Tour maybe before that. I know I've had a couple of semi-finals on a Euro Tour, and I knew I fancied it. I fancied a good run, and I did get to the quarters, and our green friend beat me again, didn't it?
Yeah, your green friend Michael van Gerwen just cutting short that comeback again, and another comeback for you against Michael van Gerwen, 16-14. And we saw on Twitter, I think the next day you were in a pub and you were on table 146. I remember Keith Deller telling me a story about he was on the road with Eric Bristow, and the next bus was at 138, and he said, I'm going to walk instead. Did you consider moving from that table?
Yeah, I think, it did cross my mind, but I put it on social media. As I say, I'm big into my social. I think it shows the type of character that I am, the type of guy that I am. I don't dwell on defeats. That was the day after talking prize money and ranking, it cost me a few quid, that shot. So for me to be able to, the day after, just joke about it, I think it shows the type of guy that I am. But yeah, 146, and he nailed it again on Sunday night, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, that's right. And as you say, after the World Match Play, more good runs on the Euro Tour. You had that second title going into the World Grand Prix last week. It's one of the hardest tournaments to try and predict, with there only being 8 seeds, and you were drawn out with Michael Smith in the first round, and it was last on that Tuesday. How difficult is it to then try and prepare for that, being last on in a long session like that, which also overran?
Yeah, it's been very tough, certainly earlier in the week, because obviously I was last on against Michael, and you look at the games, and so the night before I was sharing a house with Dobie, so he was on. So I was watching his session, and then I stayed and watched the whole night, and it was like, I think it was just before 12 o'clock by the time they finished, and it was only 2 games that went 2-1 in sets. So I looked at that he was played in the session that I was in, and I was like, I can easily see 4 or 5 games there going 2-1, so which bangs another hour on. And I was like, I ain't going to walk and stay till midnight at this rate. And, I wasn't far off. But obviously, by the time I walked off stage, I think it was 25 past 12. That's not job done then. You got to go and do all your press. And then I got to travel back. So I got back to the house where I was staying at about 1:30, 1:45. Adrenaline pumping. I don't think it got my head down to about 4 o'clock. And then typically, they put me on last again against Danny Knockett, which I had a feeling, because of who else was in that session, that would be the last game, and it was. And again, that was another late night. And they mustn't have liked me last week, and then they've gone from putting me last twice to putting me first on. So Friday was quite tough against Lukeman. But at the end of the day, you're still in the tournament. You got to get on with it. We're all professional. We've all been in these situations before. But it is hard. It is tiring, because there's a lot of other stuff that go on that the public don't see. Obviously, they can see you playing the match on TV. There's a lot of other stuff that goes into it beforehand. But it's just one of them things. You just have to get on with it.
Definitely. Well, you got over the schedule, you got past Danny Knockett, you got past Martin Lukeman, and then you get past, at the time, the world number 1 Gerwen Price to make your first major final since the Premier League in 2020. I know you've beaten Gerwen and a few of the other top boys this year, but to get a win over the world number 1 on TV in the semi-final, how much confidence did a win like that give you going into the final?
Yeah, Gerwen Price, he's playing well. He had 2 amazing sets against Joe Cullen. But apart from that, I didn't look at him and like, I wasn't worried. If he played Michael in the semi-final, he's been amazing all tournament. Then that might have been a different story. But I wasn't worried going into the game, because I thought, well, he's not playing great. I'm playing okay. That is literally all on the night, and he just didn't play well. I just don't know what happened. Thankfully, he couldn't hit tops. But I think, I evaluated that match, and I think he was waiting for me to start jumping around. He'd mentioned it in an interview the day before that and he knows what I'm like to jump around. And I think he was waiting for that, for him to get himself pumped up, and a bit of a game plan for himself to try and keep it quite flat and quite calm, and to try and stay focused on my match. And that's what I did, and I think it affected him. And luckily I got the win. And any win over Gerwen Price, when he's flying, he's pretty unstoppable. So any win against him, especially in a major semi-final, is always special.
Yeah, and the game plan worked, and you touched on it earlier. It was the first time you've played Michael van Gerwen in a TV final. It was the first time you've played a TV final where it's just the one game on the day. You've not played 1 or 2 games before that. So what was that like for you, that first experience of the longer build-up?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was certainly something that I said to my manager on the way down. I said, it's going to feel weird going into a practice room with just, like, literally me and Michael, his manager and my manager. It was, these practice rooms and these big events, because obviously they start off with, 33 players, they are quite large. So it was just, it was quite surreal, really. It was kind of a pinching moment that I'm in this situation that, you think of them situations in the world final, like all them people have been there for 3 weeks, and it's down to these final 2 guys in that massive room at the Ali Pally practicing before the game. How much did it feel? And I had a little bit of that on Sunday. It was quite surreal, really. But yeah, it was nice to be focused on the one match. To be fair, it is tough when you got to play multiple games in a day. Especially get the ups and the downs. But the prep went well. There's absolutely nothing wrong with my prep. The prep felt great. Felt like the most relaxed I felt all week, to be quite honest with you, because I had nothing to lose. All the pressure was on his shoulders. He'd been the best player by a mile, by a country mile, to be fair. So I thought, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy myself. I've got picked up another trophy, put me in the Grand Slam. I've moved close to the top 10. And my game plan was just to go and enjoy myself for the first time in a long time. Not feeling the pressure. The pressures of a couple of years ago when everyone's expecting me to win tournaments, not having the pressure of worrying about my wrist, because my wrist is pretty much back to full fitness. I just said to myself, you know what, win or lose, just make sure you have a good night. And honest to God, I absolutely love the match.
Yeah, it turned out to be a great final, and watching it, 4-0 down in a race to 5, you're up against it with Michael, but coming off the stage 4-0 down, how did you feel the game had went? Because there were 2 sets which went to a decider, and Michael was, I guess, at his most punishing, ruthless best, wasn't he? Any mistakes you made, he was all over him.
Yeah, I knew I was playing well. He had an amazing second set. I think it was under an 8 average maybe, but he beat me in a decider. But yeah, when you walk off, you kind of there's loads of telly backstage, and I clocked, and I knew I was averaging in the 90s, which is good standard at double in, double out, and he was averaging I think 94, 95, which is just ridiculous after 4 sets. So I kind of seen him off stage. I was like, Mike, I deserve a set here, lad. You know what I mean? Just chill out with your 160s. He was like, you're playing well, keep going. And obviously I'd nicked the set. So at that point, I'm just laughing and joking, trying to get the crowd involved a little bit. It wasn't the biggest of crowd, and then all of a sudden I win the next 2 sets, and then all of a sudden I'm going, oh wow, I actually might win this, because he kind of went, and I actually thought I got to him. His doubles were miles away for only 10 minutes, but that 10 minutes can be a set, so I knew I had to punish him. And that's what I was doing. I upped the game. I changed to double 16, which was working brilliant. And you never know. On another day, that 65 goals. You could have been talking to the winner, not the runner-up. But that's the beauty of darts. And I'm not going to be negative about it. I was happy with the runner-up, but I do believe that if I took that set, I could have won it.
No, I can't argue with that. And it's another great game that you've had with Michael on that stage, and I think during that comeback people were probably thinking back to the other times where you've trailed Michael and fought back. The European Championships, you were 7-1 down, got that to a last leg, the match play that we spoke about this year. How do you keep believing in those moments when you are that far behind against one of the best, and people are calling him the best in the world again now?
Yeah, again, he's like, to me, he's the best player in the world, and he's always been the best player in the world since I've ever started playing darts. So he does have that bit of an aura about him, certainly with me anyway. Other players might disagree, but he's still a man. Do you know what I mean? And I think what it is when I play him I always play him in the last stages. I never play him early, and I always play him in the last stages. And I think I give him a bit too much respect, which is why I'm always losing in games against him. But then, as any dart player knows, if you're losing and you're pretty much out of the game, I'm not trying to take any, credit from myself here, but the shackles do come off and you do relax a lot more, and it is a lot easier. to be fair, it is a lot easier to throw them good darts when there's not as much pressure on you because you think you've lost, and I think that's why I do come back quite a lot. But if I take anything away from the week is, stop giving the best player in the world a 7, 8, 9 leg head start, because you're good but you're not that good, Nathan. Do you know what I mean? So hopefully one day I won't give him his head start, and then on paper I should smash him, shouldn't I, really?
Definitely. Well, looking ahead, we know it's no secret you want to be back in the Premier League next year. Your 2 years that you had in it, they were disrupted by the pandemic. So what would it mean for you to get back in there next year, and with the full crowds that we are now back to week in, week out?
100%. A lot of players don't like talking about it, and pundits, etc. till certainly a bit later than it is now. But that's been my goal since I started playing at a level where my wrist isn't hurting me, at a level that I can compete at. That's been my target. It's been a small step. I recall, because I was missing Europeans, etc., that I fell out the top 16 on the ProTour. So I had to do 2 European qualifiers. So first step was get back in that top 16 on the ProTour, big qualified for all the Euro Tours. So I did that. I ticked that box. Then it would get back in the winner's circle and win a ProTour. Tick that box. Then it would get back in the top 60 in the world. I've ticked that box. Now it's push on TV. I've done that. So now the next stage is get back in that top 10, top 8, and make it impossible for Matt and Barry and Eddie and whoever else makes the decision to not overlook me and to put me back in the Premier League. Because I've had 2 goals at the Premier League, but I've never actually experienced the full wrath of the Premier League. I think I've had 7 nights in arenas, and the rest has all been in Milton Keynes in front of 4 security guards. So that's not the Premier League, you know what I mean? And I want to taste it properly. And I think with this new format as well, I think it would suit me down to the ground, to be fair. I think I'll do really well in it. And then likewise, like the World Series, I was gutted this year not to get America, even though with everything that was going on. I thought they would have sent me back to defend the title. Obviously they didn't, but obviously that's their decision. But I want to get back in that World Series again. I want to travel the world, and at the end of the day, I want to win trophies and make as much money as I can for me and my family. So everything's going in the right direction. The injury's done now. I am probably going to come out in the next week or so to make a bit of a statement about my wrist, because even though I understand people care and want to know what's going on, it's kind of every time I talk now, it's always about the wrist, and I want to try and put it to the back of my mind now, and just concentrate on the end of the year and what can be a fantastic end of the season for me.
Well, I'm glad that's sorted out for you. And lastly, this will probably be the last time we chat before the Football World Cup. Last time we had you on, we spoke about you were at Wembley for the Euro final with England. How do you rate the Three Lions' chances in Qatar, though?
Jeez, God. I don't know. Not very high. I just think it's just one of them tournaments this year that it's just not good, is it? Let's be quite honest with you. Without going into the politics of everything, but yeah, it's not going to be the same. It's winter, there's nothing better than watching England with a can of magnets with your England top on in a beer garden or whatever. That's what the World Cup and the Euro is about. This time we're going to have a hat and scarf on, sat inside in the pub. So it isn't going to be the same. They're not playing great, are they? To be honest with you, we should get through the group, but. We'll see what happens. All the lads are going to be shattered, aren't they, to be honest with you? They've had half the season already. We'll see what happens, but I'm not, put it this way, I'm not putting a bet on them to win. So, yeah, I'll be keeping my pound in my pocket.
Same here. I've already transferred to supporting the England women's team. They seem to win trophies.
They were amazing. I've got 2 girls myself, and we both watched the final, me and my eldest daughter, and yeah, they were an inspiration. They were amazing. So, it's... they can have their moment this year, the women. We'll give it to the women this year, and then we'll get ready for in a couple of years in the summertime.
Sounds good to me. Well, Nathan, always appreciate the time. Congratulations on the comeback you've had this year, the run to the final last week, and wish you all the best for the rest of this year and what else is to come as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Nathan for joining us. Now continuing our look back at the World Grand Prix. Looking at the tournament overall, how would you rate this year's World Grand Prix?
I would rate it fairly high. I don't think it was the greatest World Grand Prix we've ever seen. And that's because there were quite a few matches, particularly in the early rounds or in the first round, but as well in the semifinals and for much of the final, where one or both players were not playing anywhere near their best. And of course, that happens every year. But if you look, we'll take the second round. 7 of the 8 matches went to a deciding set. And there were some really great stories along the way, both in that round and leading up to it. You had Madars Razma making his first major quarterfinal. And unfortunately, he didn't compete in the quarterfinals. But he had been, that match against Daryl Gurney, which was the only one of the second round matches that didn't go 5 sets. He was brilliant, and he easily could have won it 3-0. He was playing that much better. And yes, he let Gurney in the third set, and Gurney took the third set, but Razma was unfazed and lifted his game even further to win that match. And then you had Martin Lukeman getting through not 1 but 2 last leg deciders against James Wade and Ross Smith. James Wade, of course, is a former champion of this event, and I don't think we need to say much about him because, well, he's James Wade. And Ross Smith was able to sneak into the field in the last event, make it in for the second year in a row, and has been playing some good darts recently. But Martin Lukeman, okay, they weren't the most brilliant performances, but he got over the line. And against Nathan Aspinall, who was playing really well and was by far the better player in that match, he also got into last set. And even when it looked like he ran out of steam, he broke Aspinall to stay in the match in that final set. That was just great to watch, to see these breakthrough players in Rosman and Lukeman go on deep runs. You had the race for the world number one all along. Peter Wright, if he made the final, it didn't matter what Gerwin Price did. Gerwin Price having to win the title and getting all the way to semifinal night with that still on the line, not in the line. And that contributed to it. But I think overall I'll give it a B. I think there were some really good moments and some really good stories, but there were also just that a few more poor matches and poor performances, especially at times from some of the bigger name players than we're accustomed to. And that's why I'll give it a B.
Yeah, we often bring this question out after the week-long events that we see on TV. We did it after the World Match Play, and there was a lot of hype, I remember, about this year's World Match Play. Some calling it the best ever. And as far as this year's World Grand Prix, where does it rate? I'm probably not of the high opinion as we were for the World Match Play. I'll probably give it a C, maybe a C- for me. I think it was too up and down, and the middle part of the week, as you mentioned, the Wednesday and the Thursday, when we saw that the second round, 7 of those 8 games go to a last set, you had the comebacks, you had the last leg decided, you had some real quality in there as well. Gerwin Price with those couple of sets at the end to get past Joe Cullen was something that you won't forget for a little while. And the drama in the quarterfinals with Peter Wright and Dimitri van den Berg, and then late on in that final with Nathan Aspinall's comeback from 4-0 to 4-3, and Michael van Gerwen had a weight on his mind, as he said in his post-match interview, almost got pegged back to that deciding set. But I think you look back at it, some of the first round games and the first few nights, I think there was a bit of talk about it on social media as well. It did feel a bit flat for a major event, and I remember putting it on Twitter on Tuesday or Wednesday, does this event feel like a major yet? Because the crowds were quite low, and the first few nights they did seem to drag on a little bit of time. So I think that's mainly down to the schedule, isn't it? These first round sessions, you've got 8 games, best of 3 sets with the break after the first set on the first 2 nights. And I was trying to think, I do remember these sessions starting at 6 p.m. I don't know if I'm making that up or not. It might have been a little while ago, but we've moved to a 7 o'clock start. But I do remember when it was 6 o'clock that some of the sessions would still sometimes get to midnight. So maybe it is time to go back to that 6 o'clock. I've certainly thought for a little while the World Grand Prix is an event that could do with a little bit of tinkering, maybe mirror it on the World Match Play, extend it to 9 days and make it 4 first round games in each session and increase it to best of 5 sets might be a way forward. But I think as far as the coverage from Sky, it was good to see some new camera angles, the split screen with the players' throws, the reactions after the checkout. That was a nice addition to the coverage. But as an event, will it live long in the memory? Probably not. I think probably the Nathan Aspinall comeback in the final, the drama at the end of the Peter Wright, Dimitri van den Berg quarterfinal with the mismatched darts, they'll be the games that will stick with me. And as you touched on, the milestones for certain players, Madars Razma with his best run so far on TV, and Martin Lukeman in only his second TV event, winning 2 games. And we won't mention his miscount until the miscount of the year at the end of the year, but he's in the top 50 now and took Nathan Aspinall to a last set in that quarterfinal as well. But I think apart from that, I don't think this event is going to be a contender for our Tournament of the Year award for 2022.
I hope it's not, because it's a very bad end to the year. Although speaking of end to the year, it is the end of the greatest tour in sports for this year, at least. It'll be back next year, and we'll get to that as well, as the 2022 Euro Tour concludes this weekend. Of the 44 players we know about in the field, we don't know the 4 host nation qualifiers quite yet. Who was the weekend the most important for in Gibraltar?
Well, with this event, we should start by saying we hope our producer Hannah and the captain, they're going to be in Gibraltar this weekend. Hope they both have a great time. And sadly, as we'll probably come on to talk about later, this is going to be the last Euro Tour in Gibraltar, possibly for a little while. It's not on the calendar for next year. But as far as the players that we do know are going to be playing in Gibraltar, or at least when we're recording, they are on the list of entries for it, because that could change. But yeah, it's important for different reasons, I think, for a few players. And I think you look at that race for the European Championship this year, we've had the full quota of 13 Euro Tours again. Good to see that number get back to somewhere like it was before. And with that race for the European Championship, you've got a couple of players that this is an important weekend, but they're not even playing. You've got James Wade, 28th on that Order of Merit for the European Tour. Callum Reed's 32nd, looking very unlikely he's going to hang on for that spot. James Wade, who made the final with the European Championship 2 years ago, if he drops out of that top 32 this weekend, that's a fair wad of prize money just dropping off without having a chance to defend it in a few weeks' time. But players that are looking to jump in, you've got Chris Dobey, who's 33rd, one spot off, £500 off. Wesley Placier, Willie O'Connor, he made a final this year. I think that was this is going to be his second appearance on the Euro Tour this year. So if he repeats what he did in his first one, he'll be okay for that tournament. And looking at a little bit further ahead, it was interesting to note in the interviews that I saw last week, Gerwyn Price mentioned it in Leicester. He's outside the Pro Tour top 16, the third seed in the tournament this weekend, and we've got a few more Players' Championships this year, but the last Euro Tour of the year, he's outside the Pro Tour top 16. If he can have a good run here, push himself back in, that will take some pressure off. And, he's someone that we've seen this year who's managed his schedule a lot more carefully. He skipped a lot of the Euro Tours, could maybe come back to bite him. We probably won't see him enter the European Tour qualifiers, but he'll want to get back in that Pro Tour top 16, so he is still seeded. And if he can do it this weekend, climb up those rankings, then you'll probably see him skip some of the Players' Championships, so he doesn't have to win that prize money in those events. So I think for that reason, a big weekend for Gerwyn Price. And someone like Steve Beaton as well. He's in the World Championship spots via the Pro Tour. I think 29th on that list of 32 at the moment. But this is a big chance, isn't it? This weekend, you get a few wins. That's a lot more prize money. So if he can push himself up that list, take the pressure off going into those last Players' Championships, he'll be happy with that. And probably not as important, but we've not really given him a mention on the show this week, but someone like Josh Rock, he's just qualified for the World Youth Championship final and the Grand Slam at the weekend. He's going to play Nathan Gerwen in that final next month, but any chance for him to play on stage, I think, is important for him. First year with the tour card, we're going to see a lot of him on the stage over these next few months. So if he could get a few wins, keep that confidence high going into the Players' Championships and likely a European Championship debut the week after, he'll take that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned a few players I was going to mention, but for obvious reasons. This is the last event before the cutoff, and one of the last chances to get money before the World Championships on the Pro Tour Order of Merit, at least. And that means it's important to a lot of players for different reasons. You have Chris Dobey and Willie O'Connor, who right now are just outside the last spots. Dobey just behind his same street neighbor, Callum Reed, who's the last person currently in. One win and Dobey knocks him out, at least provisionally, because Dobey could still be knocked out by people chasing him. But one win would be enough to provisionally get him in. Willie O'Connor, who's also chasing a World Championship spot after a slow start to the year. He's probably done enough now to be safe for the World Championships, but not guaranteed. But he's obviously trying to get to the European Championships as well. That gives him a lot to play for. But there are other players who are in this field who could be knocked out if they go out early and the people behind them win a couple matches. You mentioned Josh Rock. He's probably done enough. Same for Gabriel Clemens. But a win certainly wouldn't hurt either of their chances. Vincent van der Voort might need a win because he's just barely inside by 500 pounds. And then you have, Ryan Meikle, who's also in the field. And we haven't talked a lot about him this year. As things currently stand for the World Championships, he's the 8th qualifier. You would think we would have talked about him with that all in mind. If you look at the 7 players ahead of him in the Pro Tour list, we've talked about Andrew Gilding at least once. We've talked about Martin Lukman at least once. We've talked about Matas Razma at least once each month. We talked about Roby John Rodriguez. We've talked about Josh Rock pretty much every week. We talked about Scott Williams, particularly early in the season, and Jim Williams won a title. We haven't talked about him as much recently. We haven't talked about Ryan Meikle in a year at least. And that means he's quietly had a really good season. He's had what I called out of Richie Edhouse last year as being quietly have just doing it each and every time. And okay, he's 72nd in averages in the Players' Championship events this year, but he's 40th in matches played, which means even though he might be right around the median of tour in terms of performance, he's doing it at the right times and getting wins. And it's not like his opponents haven't been playing well against him. They've averaged nearly 93 against him, which is a 1.5 above where he is this year. So he's been having, and it's the 39th highest average against. So he's been getting results against players playing well this year, but he still has work to do to make sure he gets to the European Championship. And maybe this is that breakthrough moment for him. And that's what I want to see. You know, he's been for over a year now quietly just been going about his business. Maybe this is that moment for him to be a little less quiet and get that really big breakthrough and have a deep run. It would get him into the European Championships and get us talking about him more often. Just a couple other players, though. Martin Schindler is barely in the top 32 for the World Championships. Mensur Suljovic as well. And Suljovic, if he drops out of the top 32, is not a guarantee to be playing in the World Championships. Probably would. Big weekend for both of them. Of course, Suljovic has made the final here before. Steve Beaton needs to go to the final, or at least the semifinal, to have a chance to make the European Championships, but needs a run to stay in the world spots. You have Ryan Joyce just outside, and he skipped the European Tour earlier this year. That 1,000 pounds that he had qualified for, that 1,000 pounds is almost the entire difference between him and being in Worlds right now. He needs a run. And then you have a few other players like Jeff Smith, Chris Kachuk, and Mario van den Bogarde, who are a bit further adrift, but getting a couple wins would draw them that little bit closer. A lot to play for, a lot to look forward to in Gibraltar. And I think those are the players worth mentioning as needing or that would benefit from a good weekend.
Yeah, it should be an interesting weekend, and interesting that you mentioned Ryan Meikle. Of course, he won't claim it as a claim to fame, but he was a former teammate of mine in the few games that I played for Suffolk Youth. But he is someone that we have been talking about when I've been at the football at Stowmarket in the last few months, definitely making some strides. And we'll definitely be talking more about him, I think, over these next few months. Well, let's get to our second guest on this week's show, a player that will be looking to join Ryan on the PDC Tour next year with a tour card. He's playing in the final weekend of the Challenge Tour this weekend. Here's our chat with Danny van Trijp. I'm pleased to say I'm joined by the two-time winner on the Challenge Tour this year, Danny van Trijp. Thanks for the time, Danny. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and we're talking only a few days before you make the trip to Leicester for the final weekend of the Challenge Tour season. How are you feeling ahead of an important weekend for your career?
I'm not nervous yet, but if I get the nerves this weekend, it will be positive nerves, like always. I hope I will get them. Yeah, I'm third place. I think it's going to be a tough weekend with many good players. Robert Owen, Stephen Burton, they are really behind me. And yeah.
We'll come back to this weekend later, but let's rewind back to the start for you in darts. Being from the Netherlands, how old were you when you got introduced to the game, and how did you discover darts?
I started in 2016. I was 18 years old. I had a birthday and we played for fun. And I liked the game, so I was going to do more tournaments and competition. And in 2018, I started with BDO and PDC. In 2018, I started with the development tour. And 2019, I had my debut at the DeWitt tour. 2020, I played the UK Open. Now this year, I won 2 challenge tours, played Gibraltar tour, Tour 9 Darts at the Motor Series. So this year is my best year of my life, I think.
Definitely. Well, let's go through some of those achievements. As you say, 2018, you made that step up to the development tour for the first time at the age of 21. What was it at that time which persuaded you to give it a go?
I was happy if I had an average of 80. I'm a man of statistics, statistiker, if you call it so. I watch if I throw a game, I look after the game what my average was, and I want to know that. It makes me feel better. In the beginning, if I had an 80 average, I thought was okay. That's good.
Well, later that year, 2018, you had some deep runs on the development tour, a semi-final, a couple of quarterfinals. How much confidence did you take from those successes and beating some top players as well in your first year?
Yeah, I had always the same players at the semi-finals or quarterfinals. I think I had Ted Evans 5 times and I lost 5 times. Geert Nentjes 4 times, I lost 4 times. It was always the same players. And when I get to the semis and I had to play against them, I was like, I thought, I gonna lose this one. But now now it's different. I beat many players, and now I feel more confident.
As you mentioned, 2019, you ticked off some more milestones. You went to Q School, you played on the Challenge Tour for the first time as well, and as you mentioned, you made your debut on the Euro Tour in Germany. What was that experience like, being on the big stage for the first time?
First game was against Adam Hunt. I was a little bit nervous, but then when I had to do the walk-on, all the nerves were gone. I really liked it on stage. I enjoyed it. At every game till now, I enjoyed it on the stage.
Well, that year, 2019, you also played your brother Wesley on the development tour. 1 win each. What was it like playing your brother in a PDC event?
Yeah, it was not hard because I play Wesley a couple of times in competition here in the Netherlands and the tournaments. And in the beginning, I think he was the better one. But I took it more serious, and now I'm playing Challenge Tour, Euro Tours, and my brother throughout Q School, but he didn't throw Challenge Tour. But if I play against Wesley now, if I play 10 times, I win 9 of them, I guess.
That's a bit like my record against my brother. I'm sure he'll love listening to that. But later that year, you played another Euro Tour as well, the Dutch Darts Masters, your home Euro Tour, if you like, and you picked up your first win as well. What was that moment like, playing in front of your home fans and getting a win as well?
It felt amazing. I called the day before the Dutch Darts Masters. We had the qualification tournament. I won the final against Luc Peters, and I called my boss to say I qualified for the TV tournament. I was very excited, and he said, "Yeah, sorry, but you have to go to work." So I worked that day till I think it was 1 o'clock, and I had to play 12 o'clock, and I had to play at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So after my work, I went to Zwolle. It was a 90 minutes drive. I had a couple of pints, and I think I thrown for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then I went on stage and I beat Keegan Brown.
Wow, what a win that turned out to be then. And you also got a taste of the Players' Championship events as well that year. You played in 2 of them. You won a game in your second event. What was that experience like, being in that room with all the 128 players, a lot of the big names in those couple of days?
Yeah, it was nice to throw at that tournament. The first game against Dave Pellet, I lost with 6-5. I'm at the Challenge Tour and Development Tour. You play 2 tournaments a day, and now you play 1 tournament. So if you lose the first round, you played for nothing. And the day after that, I beat Simon Stevenson, missed match touch against Steve Beaton. But I thought I won a game. It was fine for me.
Moving on then, 2020, Q School comes around and you come so close to winning that tour card, losing out in the last 4 on the final day. Was that a hard moment to get over, or did you try and take the positives from it and go, I'm not that far away, one day I'm going to get that tour card?
No, I really felt sick after that. I had to throw up after that day because I was so sick of it. But the only positives of that day was that I qualified for the UK Open.
Yeah, that UK Open, your first PDC major a few months later. Again, you get a win on your debut as well. What are your memories of playing at Minehead and in an event this big like that as well?
Yeah, it was amazing. Many people. I won my first game, I think. Yeah, I won my first game against Boris Kotsov, and then the second game I played a 96 average against William Borland, and he beat me 6-0. But I was happy that I tried the UK Open. It was an experience, really good experience.
Well, not long after that, the world shuts down with the pandemic, and for much of the next 2 years, it was very stop-start with a lot of breaks. How was that time for you? Did you play much darts online, or did you take some time away?
I never trained at home. So when the pandemic starts, I throw online tournaments like every day. But in 2021, it keeps. I throw less tournaments. So at the end of 2020, I threw my last online tournament, so I only threw for a year. And then I was, I didn't want to throw that anymore because I didn't like it anymore.
So how good has it been then this year, 2022? And we're going to come on to talk about a lot of the darts that you've played, but this must be the most busy year that you've had in darts. So many different events, so many different tournaments that you've got to play in.
Yeah, I have more tournaments than a tour card holder. I played the Challenge Tour, I played the ProTour, Modus Super Series. I played for the Dutch team at Six Nations Cup. I played in the European Championship last week in Spain. So it has been a really busy year for me.
Yeah, it definitely has. 2022. It's already been a year to remember. And let's get on to the Challenge Tour, because after losing in that final of event 8, you go one better in event 9 the same day to win the title. What was that day like, playing all those games, coming so close in the first event to a title, and then going one step better in the next round?
We went there on Thursday, and I was really sick. And they did the draw on the Fridays. And 30 minutes before the tournament started, I thought, I don't want to play anymore. So I called in sick, and I didn't throw the first one, and I didn't throw the second one. So I went to bed on 10:30 in the morning. So Saturday, I also was sick, but I thought I'm going to throw. And then I get to the final, and I lost against Stephen Burton with 5-0. I thought, first final, and when is going to be my second final? The tournament after that, I won.
Good times, and those runs, that gets you back in the Players' Championship events. I think you've played something like 11 Players' Championships this year, again picking up some wins, playing some of the big names like James Wade, Dave Chisnell. How have you found it on the Pro Tour this year, getting a lot more run of games?
Yeah, when they did it in first round, I didn't get a seeded player. So I thought, if I don't get a seeded player, it feels more easier to win. And at that week with 4 Portuguese in July, I won 3 out of 4 in the first round. And then last day I get Dave Chisnell in the first round. So, at day 1 I won against Scott Wade. So that day I get to the third round. So I was happy with the results.
And a second Challenge Tour title follows in July. You beat Yellow Clarkson in the final with a 95 average as well. What did it mean to back up that first title that you had earlier in the year, get a second one so soon after that first one?
After that one, I thought, oh wow, I'm really close to a tour card now. But we had 9 tournaments left. So I thought, if I win one more, I'm in a good position for a tour card.
And you mentioned you've had a lot of darts to play this year. How have you juggled playing all that, and I guess still working as well? Has darts become full time for you yet, or are you still juggling the two side by side?
No, I'm still working, but I think in April or May, I said to my boss, I can't work 5 days. So if I can work 5 days, I work 5 days. But the 5th day is time for time, so I can use it when I'm next week. I took the week off. So normally I have to work 4 days, and I get paid for 4 days. But if I can work 5 days, I will work 5 days. But the 5th day is time for time. And that day I will use in another week.
Well, let's go back to this upcoming weekend. 4 events left on the Challenge Tour. You're in 3rd spot, which at the moment would get you that tour card and a spot at Ali Pali because of how well Scott Williams is doing in other tournaments. So how much do you look at the rankings? How difficult is it to focus on your own game?
If I'm still in the tournament, I'm fully focused on my own game. But if I lose at the tournament, I watch the other players. That gives me, how do you say that? Keeps me motivated.
Well, you're in a good position with 4 events to go, but as we know that the Challenge Tour, it is very competitive. 2 events in a day as well is a challenge in itself. But for you, if you were to finish the weekend in those spots, what would it mean to you to have that tour card, and before that get to make your World Championship debut as well?
Yeah, I hope I'll get a tour card in the World Championship place. It means a lot to me. After all those years at the Q school, I don't want to go to a Q school anymore.
No, definitely not. Well, beyond this weekend, what else have you got lined up darts-wise for the rest of 2022? I guess we're going to see you in some more Players' Championships, possibly the Modus League as well.
Yeah, I'm going to throw the ProTours next week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, after the Challenge Tour. I get an invite from that, and maybe if I'm still 3rd or 4th or maybe in the top 5, I can play the last 2 ProTours at 5 November and 6 November. and I'm going to throw Modus in the week of 5 December.
Excellent. Well, Danny, it's a pleasure to chat to you. We appreciate your time and we wish you all the best for this upcoming weekend, the final weekend of the Challenge Tour, and trying to get that tour card and spot at Ali Pali as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks again to Danny for joining us, and we'll finish up the show with a few questions away from tournaments, but I guess looking ahead to tournaments that we're going to see next year, because since we last spoke, the PDC have unveiled their calendar for 2023. What were your biggest takeaways from the announcement?
Well, we'll start with the other than Q School, the first event on the calendar. And last time at least the last time I was here to join you to record, I mentioned that there was a lot of Bahrain that week. And that was because Bahrain was going to be in potentially 3 different events, including the PDC Asian event. We were also talking the World Masters over in the WDF. And then we also mentioned the possibility that one of them would get through to the PDC World Championships. Well, Bahrain is going to remain in the news because it got added to the World Series schedule. It's not the first time it's been in the Middle East, because there was Dubai for those few years near the beginning of the World Series, but the first time since then, and the first event anywhere in Asia since 2018. So to see an event return in Asia, and not necessarily in a location that we would have bet the bank on if we were making a bet on where it would be, was interesting. And I think there'll be more to talk about that going forward. We'll see how they determine who the 8, we'll say host nation qualifiers are, but whether they will be all Bahraini players, or whether it will be a mix of the Middle East, or whether it will be a mix of players from all over the Asian tour. That's something that we just don't know, but it'll be interesting. Also of note, you mentioned it earlier in the show, the loss of Gibraltar from the European Tour. It's been on the calendar, excluding from pandemic-related reasons, every year since the very first year of the European Tour. We also see more German events, 8 of them, than we've seen in recent years, which takes away a little bit of that variety. Another thing, it's a little bit more subtle on the calendar, but it's the backloading of events for the Players' Championships. Nearly half of them, 14 of the 30 for next year, are scheduled to be after the World Match Play. Usually more of them have been in the front end of the year. And because of the trying to get through all those European tours earlier, going back to almost exclusively 2 Players' Championship events surrounded by a European Tour set of qualifiers at the beginning of the year, we end up with nearly half of them in the second half. Granted, some of those in the second half become a pair of 3 event days in Barnsley, followed by a 4-event day in October. Not a 4-event day, but 4 days of events, I mean. So we're seeing that backloading, which will be interesting. It means there'll be fewer opportunities in Players' Championship events to get into the World Match Play after the season starts. Might make it to some extent harder for newcomers to get in, but the counterpoint is there'll be 10 European tours early in the year, most of them, which is where there's substantially more money at stake, although fewer players will be able to cash, because only 48 players at most get ranking money, potentially less if seeds lose. But there is more money in those events. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the qualification for the World Match Play, having so many European Tour events early and fewer of the Players' Championships. And then the last thing is only having 1 event in Australia as opposed to 2. I think that's more fair. I think that, the counterpoint is that there's so much traveling around the world to begin with. To get a trio of events is nice, but no other country gets 2 events each year. And maybe it was time that Australia was down to 1. That said, maybe it's also time that the PDC, for the first time in over a decade, considered returning to Australia with ranking events, because the quality of the system there and the quality of players that have produced from Australia, I think, merits consideration of forcing the rest of the tour, at least for at some point, to head over for an event that would count for ranking money.
Yeah, some good points you make there. And I think one of the big ones for me really is to do with the World Series and the timing of the events in where they fit in the calendar. And also, of course, as you mentioned, the new one in Bahrain. But we've got 2 World Series events happening in January next year. And I think the World Final is on the 3rd of January. So 9 days after that World Final, we are going to see a World Series event in Bahrain. The following weekend, we'll see one, the Nordic Darts Masters. Then the following weekend, you've got the Masters. And then a few days later, you've got the start of the Premier League. And for the players that are going to be in all those events. They're going to be in the Premier League week in, week out. It's going to be difficult for them to take a lot of time off before you're probably looking at June time, really, if they want to take a full week off, really, from playing darts. And of course, the weekends they can take off. We'll probably see a lot more of that next year with players skipping more Players' Championships and Euro Tours, talking about the Premier League players there. But yeah, I think it's it's been something that's been discussed quite a lot this year. The first year back to that full schedule after the two stop-start years is the schedule of players. And looking at the calendar, it is going to be pretty full on again next year. And as darts fans, as people that love the darts, there's going to be a lot of darts to enjoy next year. And as you say, they've cut back in the World Series from the 3 events to 2 events down under. You've got the Dutch World Series event that's not on the list for next year. We've still got the finals in Amsterdam, but the standalone one is not on there. And I think there is still a few spare weekends. We might see another World Series event or something else added to the calendar. And if you listen to our chat with the PDC Chief Exec Matt Porter last week, and thanks everyone that sent in questions for that, but we did ask him a few questions about certain countries having events put on there, and he said they want to expand, but it is about doing it at the right time and where there's going to be a market. And as far as darts in Bahrain, I don't know too much about it. We, as you say, we gave a shout out to darts in Bahrain, so maybe that's why they've got a World Series event. No, it's going to be interesting to see how that event plays out, because we know there are players in Bahrain. Of course, they played in that Asian championship from the PDC a few weeks ago, but what is the dart scene like there? What's the crowd going to be like for that one? That's going to be interesting to see. And a point that you made there, I didn't even think about how they are going to pick the local players for that one. Are they going to stick to players just from Bahrain or spread it out further across Asia? That is an interesting one. But yeah, I think I'd have liked to have seen an event, a World Series event, maybe in Japan or somewhere like that, I think. But given the last few years, and darts is probably only just getting back up and running really in Asia as far as the Asian tour, hopefully for next year, it could be maybe the following year we see something there. But yeah, looking at the schedule, it's going to be another busy year of darts from the PDC, and all I can say is keep them coming.
Now we'll have a listener question. This one comes from Ben Hud. He asks, do you think the trophies in darts need improving? Apart from the Worlds, the Match Play, the Premier League, and the Grand Slam, they're all fairly average. World Series and Euro Tour look really cheap for me, and I'm not sure it's a good look for the sport. That's what Ben Hud said. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's a good question, and apologies firstly to Ben, because I've had this question in the book for a few weeks, and feels like good timing this week as we've had the new trophies for the World Grand Prix, which were a little bit different. It was a dart inside a glass block, or however you want to describe it, but that was something a little bit different. And yeah, I'm like Ben, I'm all for the variation. We've had the Euro Tour recently where Dave Chisnall was handed one of the biggest trophies I've ever seen handed out in darts. It was up there with the Sid Waddell trophy at Ali Pali for how big it was, and it would be good to see the Euro Tours maybe start to evolve from that, the small memento trophies that they're giving out, and mix it up a bit. And I guess seeing a player lift a big trophy subconsciously, that makes the event feel more important, doesn't it? And I'll never forget when John O'Shea won the World Masters, we thought we'd see him lift that famous World Masters trophy, and he was given this small thing which kind of diminished from the achievement of winning that trophy. And okay, he was given the proper one a few weeks later, but as fans of the game, these trophies, the big ones especially, they probably do mean something, and it's probably only a little thing and maybe not high up on the list of things to change. But if there was an improvement, we'd certainly notice it, wouldn't we, when these players are lifting these trophies? So yeah, maybe some different designs, and the players can, their mantelpieces, fireplaces, or if they're good enough, the trophy cabinets, they can look a bit jazzier with some different trophies for sure.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I don't think it's necessarily a bad look for the sport, like Ben Hud said, because, well, the European Tour is really only watched by people who care and follow darts week in, week out. It's not, it is in some countries sometimes televised, but most of the place it's not. And the only people watching are those that pay the subscription because they want to watch the events. And therefore, it kind of makes sense to have a bit more subdued trophy, or at least it's defensible to have a more subdued trophy. That said, it certainly looks nicer when a player is holding up a big trophy at the end of the event. And there's also the ability to incorporate the various locations that you're going into that. And that's, I think, even more so for the World Series, to find a way to have a trophy that incorporates the culture, the traditions of wherever that event's taking place would be a bit of a neat thing and a cool thing to do. That said, the most elaborate, the most prestigious, the most wonderful trophies should be the ones that are for the most prestigious, the most wonderful tournaments. And those are the four that Ben Hudd mentioned in the question. So I don't think it's a bad look for the sport, but I do agree that it might be time to improve the World Series and Euro Tour trophies, and considering ways to do that reflect the culture and the traditions of where those events are taking place would be a good way to go about it.
And lastly, one more question before we go. Today, when we're recording this on Tuesday, is 30 years since the PDC, the World Darts Council, as it began, finished its first tournament. The PDC have put out a list of 30 iconic moments from those 30 years. But what I want to know is, what is your favourite moment from the list that the PDC have put out, and what is your favourite moment which didn't make the list?
Yeah, it's a tough question because there are so many good moments on there, and there's so many that didn't make it, and you can quibble about a few of them, but it's because there have been a lot of really good moments throughout the 30 years of the PDC, and particularly in the last 15 or so years as there's been the boom in darts, that leads to that problem that there are going to be things that don't make the cut. I found 4 on the list, though, that really jumped out for me, and I'll go in reverse chronological order. Most recently, Fallon beating Super Ted Evans at the World Championship. It was an iconic moment in sport that transcended just darts, and I think that gives it a very good chance to win, and a deserved win if it does. The Taylor Lewis Grand Slam of Darts semifinals, arguably the greatest match in PDC history. MVG's 17 perfect darts at the World Championships was something that may never be matched again. Yes, I know he's done 18 or 19 over across 3 legs since then, but to do 17 in a row, a perfect leg followed by 8 of the 9 in the next, is something that no one has done and may ever happen again. But lastly, and I think the one I'm going to vote for, Barney winning the World Championship over Phil Taylor. That's the other contender for match of the year. And considering that he was the face of the BDO, Phil Taylor was the face of the PDC, and he came over and won that. And okay, it was only moving him up to number 2 in the world, but without a doubt, he was the world's best player at that point in time. And to cap off that year by doing that, I think that, and to do it against the greatest player of all time, I think that's the one I'm going to vote for. Of the things missing, I named 3. Larry Butler winning the first world match play over Dennis Priestley, pulling away in the end to win that match, coming from all the way over the U.S. and beating a bunch of British players on the way to the trophy. Paul Nicholson, to quote the commentary from that match, turning off the power and dethroning the king at the Players' Championship Finals to win his lone major. The fact that he did it by beating Phil Taylor, giving Phil Taylor the darts in that match, and still beating him in a last leg decider. That 170 checkout before the second break, hitting all the right shots at the right moment, and then to still have something left. And that was the second match of the session, so he didn't have the long break. Still having something left and beating Mervyn King in the final, I think deserves a mention. And then lastly, and maybe the best moment of all time, from the preliminary round of the World Championships, I think 6-7 years ago now, Rini Idams and Tanawat from Thailand, each averaging 162 visits in. So it's a moment I will never forget, and probably the greatest moment in the history of, well, this planet.
Some great picks there, and I was nodding my head at pretty much your full answer there. And yeah, the PDC, as I said, they've put out on Twitter their 30 most iconic moments, and if you go on the PDC website you can vote, and I think there's a chance to win loads of different prizes, including a Rob Cross shirt, so that's enough for me to go and vote on it. But yeah, some of those moments when I was looking down that list I was too young for, but I've seen loads of times on YouTube or on TV, like the Phil Taylor Eric Bristow World Championship game 1997, the Phil Taylor 9-darter at the World Match Play 2002, and props to whoever put this list together for putting first PDC televised and showing respect to the late Sean Greatbatch, who hit the first live on TV, and John Park beating Phil Taylor in the 2003 final. I've got very vague memories of that at the time, but yeah, I think for me the answer from that list is pretty obvious. As a Peter Wright fan, it was him winning his first world title in 2020, and after all the defeats to Michael van Gerwen in those TV finals, to get the better of him in the biggest one and see what he's gone on to achieve, put together a CV that his talent deserves. That is my favourite moment from the list. But I think if I took my Peter Wright wig off and as a neutral, I'm going to go with the same as you, Burton. I would go with that Phil Taylor, Raymond van Barneveld World Championship final from 2007, because it was that game and then the Martin Adams, Phil Nixon final at Lakeside in the BDO a week or so later, which really gave me the darts bug. Two dramatic games that got me hooked. And I think back to those two games now and they still stand the test of time, still two amazing games. And yeah, they're going to be the moments that are the most iconic for me. And yeah, if I was to be a neutral, I would vote for that Circus Tavern final. And as far as the moment that's missing, you'd probably all expect us to mention moments with Mark Walsh and Coast Dompe, but I'll go the other direction. And I think the Phil Taylor, Kevin Payne 2004 final at the Circus Tavern is a game that was such a dramatic game. The Robert Thornton World Grand Prix win against Michael van Gerwen 2015 was a game that one of the games that I've always remembered. But I think as far as how far darts has come really in those 30 years, and I'll go back to 2018, the World Series in Germany, where they had a record crowd of 20,000 in there. And that's a moment where you thought this sport is really going places. It's moments like that, seeing the coverage that the game has now on TV and the following, which is still growing, and the prize money, of course, as well. And darts as a professional sport, it's come a long way in those 30 years. And I think getting 20,000 people, I don't know if they're all in there at the same time in that building, in that stadium, but that's a special thing to tick off and say, look what we've been able to do. And yeah, I'm sure there's going to be plenty more moments to come. But for me, if I was looking at a moment off that list, it would be getting such a big crowd for an event to watch darts. It takes some doing.
Anything else for this week?
Well, as always, got to say big thank you to our guests on the show this week, to Nathan, to Danny for joining us, to our sponsor Dartwolf. If you want more Dynamite Darts content, head on over to dartwolf.tv. Give Dartwolf a follow at Dartwolf180. Big thanks to everyone for listening as always. I'm going to go and get some practice now I've got 2 more league games this week and next week before I make the trip to London next weekend, after this weekend for the Viking Cup, and I'll give a mention to it next week. But heading up on the Friday, the event is on Sunday the 23rd, but anyone who fancies a throw on the Friday or the Saturday, or if you're going to be at the Viking Cup on the Sunday, do come and say hello. It would be good to say hello to as many people as possible. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good day and a chance to pay tribute to a darts legend in Andy Fordham. So we'll have more on that next week though, but until then, make sure you enjoy the darts.
Yes, indeed. I agree with everything you say, although I have something else for this week, because the last time we recorded, well, I was here to record was 3 weeks ago, and we went over our top 10 PDC players of all time. And I noticed a tweet from someone named Elliot who said, interesting, though, that Burton skipped Adrian Lewis for top 10 PDC players, a deliberate exclusion. And it was a deliberate exclusion, but I did go back and reconsider. And I talked in that episode a lot about longevity. And I think I underestimated that longevity, because even before Adrian Lewis won the World Championships, he was a top 10 player for 5 years. And he remained a top 10 player for another 5, 6, 7 years after that. And that longevity is something that I used on some of the other players. And I didn't give Adrian Lewis that same credit, possibly because I've been clouded by the last few years for him. On retrospect, I think I was wrong, and Adrian Lewis is top 10 all time. So I did have something else to add this week, and that's that I think I was wrong 3 weeks ago. I don't know how that affects my overall list, because I would have to go back and re-listen because I don't remember my entire list. But I think that was a valid call out that I was wrong to skip him on that. Beyond that, I echo everything that you said. Thank you to our sponsor. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. And we still don't have a name for it. Sexy September's over. We need a name for October. Maybe Opulent October? I don't know. We'll come up with something. But there's events every week, so we'll be back to recap the last European Tour event of the year and look ahead to all the great things still to come. Until then, hang tight and enjoy the darts.